All right. I about ran out of breath preaching earlier. I don't know. Like you guys will probably tell. In a little bit I was going to pass out, I guess. I don't know. I go outside, cough a little bit, and breathe, and I can breathe just fine. Come in here. It must be mold. I don't know. It's got to be because I can feel my head starting to stuff back up again. Yeah. I don't know. This morning it's fun. For sure. Did everybody get their blanks filled out today?
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, good.
My blank filler outer did just fine.
Your blank filler outer. All right. Well, we are in Revelation 18. And so I think we got down to 9. I thought so. All right. So we are looking at, of course, what we saw in the first part of the chapter is the fall of Babylon. So what is Babylon? Okay, it's Rome. And so this is the judgment, and we've talked about the judgment upon them. It's been announced. What was significant about this announcement or this message that John has for us in this chapter? What's significant about it? It was written in what tense? Past tense, right? Like it's happened. And so it's a picture of, in that confidence that it's going to happen because it's stated in that tense of it's happened already. And so we saw that from 1 through verse 8. We talked about those that were about the merchants and things like that were very sad because of what was going on. And then that brings us really to more of that focus on the kings and the merchants starting in verse 9. So somebody want to read verse 9 through, say, 19.
The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys her merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who traveled by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance, and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate.
All right, so it's the agony over Rome. And so the first that's mentioned in verse 9 is the kings, right? Those that had committed the fornication, those that lived that luxurious life. And so we're looking at those other nations of the world that enjoyed in the luxury that Rome provided, okay? And so they are seeing this destruction, and they're standing back, in a sense. They're looking at this, and they're in agony. They're trying to stay far away. Notice verse 9. When they see the smoke of their burning, verse 10, standing at a distance for fear of her torment. And so the picture here is of them standing far back. Why? Why do you think they're standing far back?
They're afraid they don't want to get involved.
They don't want to get involved, right? They were fine to be involved in the luxury and the fornication, all of that, and the wealth, but when it comes to their destruction, they're like, we're going to stand back. And so there's this picture of this punishment that's coming upon Rome. I'm just going to read Isaiah 13 and verse 9.
Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it.
All right, so that destruction God is bringing upon them, they're standing back and watching. But they're weeping and they're lamenting, right? The word weep, it means, Mount says, it's a loud expression of grief. It's a bewail. And so this is a extremely loud wailing. And then lament means to beat on one's chest. It also means to bewail too. But when you hear those words, what do you hear? Is it someone just crying? What is this really pointing to? I would think of a temper tantrum, right? They are just distraught. They are yelling. There's if you watch some of the videos that are going on in Minnesota and things that's going on there, I think of that. It's that bewailing, that yelling, that screaming, and things in that sense. Why are they lamenting? Why are they yelling and screaming? Why are they so much sorrow? Is it because Rome is destroyed? Yeah, I mean, part of it, but why? They're giving up their wealth. They're seeing their avenue of wealth. They're seeing their luxury get taken away. That's the picture. That's why they're wailing and weeping. Somebody read Ezekiel 26. It's kind of a 6 verses, I guess not that too long. It's Ezekiel 26, 15 through 21.
Thus says the Lord God to Tyre, will the coastlands not shake at the sound of your call when the wounded cry, when slaughter is made in the midst of you? Then all the princes of the sea will come down from their thrones, lay aside their robes, and take off their embroidered garments. They will clothe themselves with trembling. They will sit on the ground, tremble every moment, and be astonished at you. And they will take up a lamentation for you, and say to you, how you have perished, O one inhabited by sea-faring men, O renowned city, who was strong at sea, she and her inhabitants, who caused their terror to be on all her inhabitants. Through which verse?
21.
Now the coastlands tremble on the day of your call. Yes, the coastlands by the sea are troubled at your departure. For thus says the Lord God, when I make you a desolate city, like cities that are not inhabited, when I bring the deep upon you and great waters cover you, and I will bring you down with those who descend into the pit, to the people of old, and I will make you dwell in the lowest part of the earth, in places desolate from antiquity, with those who go down to the pit, so that you may never be inhabited, and I shall establish glory in the land of the living. I will make you a terror, and you shall be no more. Though you are sought for, you will never be found again, says the Lord God.
All right, 6 verses is still a lot of reading, sorry. But that the picture given there is, if I remember right, is of Tyre. I'm talking about the coastland. And so that same imagery given in Ezekiel is used here. Remember how many times throughout the book of Revelation we can go back to the Old Testament and find the same language used, okay? And so the picture is given there of those that were involved in Tyre and Sidon, which is the nation of Tyre, that they were lamenting because Tyre and Sidon was a massive trade port. They were the wealth of that area. And so when they fell, which that happened in the time of Alexander the Great, and well, Babylon came in and destroyed the city, and Tyre went out into an island, and then Alexander the Great came later, built a land bridge to the island and destroyed the city. And that was their final end. But when that happened, that hurt the economy of those that were profiting from Tyre. And so that's the picture given here. That same language is used to describe the kings who are looking at the fall of Rome, and they're crying. They're wailing because everything that they had, that luxury they had, is now going to be gone.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
So this just, I don't know, the visual picture here is really interesting in that yesterday when I was driving the truck, I was listening to something about Japanese Samurai Society. A little bit of a tangent, but in their caste, they had a very strict caste system, and at the very bottom were the merchants. Everybody else really provided value, whether it's for defense or farmers providing food or craftsmen providing goods. At the very bottom were the merchants. because all they did was make money, buying and selling profits. And just to hear about this, it's like, man, really, what value did they provide other than luxury?
Yeah.
It's nice to have luxury, but you need to eat. You need to be safe. You know, you need to have a house.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very bottom is just all the luxury that this is really talking about.
That's interesting because that's very similar.
Very, very tangible, but just it really, listening to it yesterday, it's kind of really striking down today.
Yeah. Yeah, because their business was just making money.
It's not necessary for life.
Yeah.
This is just nice stuff to have.
Yep.
And now they're bewailing it.
Because as we get down to where it focuses more just on the merchants, it talks about all those luxurious things. We're going to talk about that.
They were the bottom
Yeah.
above the non-humans, the people that weren't considered human.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a good connection there. Yeah, so that's they're wailing because they're losing their wealth. The kings at the first point, they're losing their luxury and their wealth and things like that. And so their cry was going to be loud. Jeremiah 15 verse 46 is another passage that states along that line. But Homer Haley, he's got a really good, I've used him several times, but he's got a really good take on the book of Revelation. He said, quote, like so much of the world with selfish sorrows and tears, these kings mourn their own loss, not because Babylon herself has fallen. They're not worried about Rome. They don't care about Rome falling. They just care about their own selves. They only care about what that's going to do to their own losses. And so, were they really allies of Rome then? No. Why were they allies of Rome? Because it benefited their pockets, right? And their luxury and their sinful desires. And so verse 11, now as we go on, there's a lot of similarities there. We're going to see more of that. Verse 11, it says, and the merchants now of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. So, as you stated, that their merchandise, their luxury is going away. And so these merchants are mourning, not because of the fall of Rome, but because they're losing their money, their wealth. They're the ones Rome was the center of trade for that world at that time. They hauled cargo, sold cargo, things like that. The merchants were important in that aspect for their luxury. And so notice the luxurious items that are mentioned through this. Merchandise of gold and silver, and precious stones and pearls. So the gold and silver, of course, is money. And then you have the precious stones and pearls that was traded also. The fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet. What were the purple and scarlet garments for? Royalty. So, as you said, it's not just clothing. This is the royal clothing. This is the luxurious clothing that showed their supposed importance is now not a trade for them anymore. Because, where's the royalty at? They're gone. Silk. Where did silk come from? China. Yeah, worms. Yeah, that's right. Silkworms, right? But it was from China. And that's kind of interesting because how far was the trade of Rome? All the way to China. And not only that, the next one is chitron wood, or I think King James used a thine wood. Scented wood, that's what it is. So Homer says the thin wood was an aromatic wood of beautiful texture, imported from North Africa, and prized for its aroma as a resource for making fine furniture. And so it was a aroma scented wood. So that came from North Africa. And then you have cinnamon. Where was cinnamon from at that time? Well, cinnamon was from, some say it could come from Egypt, but more likely it came from South China also. Spice. This spice was a spice that was used for perfumes, and that came from India. So we're getting this picture of how far the trade and the merchants traded throughout the world at that time, all the way to China and India. That's a long ways. The foods that were mentioned. So you have what verse was that? That was down in verse 13. It says the wine and oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses, or not horses, but for that. All of those were mentioned as foods that were used for their royal feasts and also for their worship of idols. Then you have the horses and chariots and men. Well, the horses and chariots were for what? For war. There's not going to be a trade for that anymore because why? They're gone. But what about men? Why would it mention men? For slaves. Rome.
It mentions slaves and souls of men.
Yes, exactly. It's the slaves, as in those that worked, but I think the souls of men points to the gladiators. It points to the games where they killed people for entertainment. They captured people and put them in those games to kill them for entertainment. And so I think that souls of men is a point to that. And so Dan Cates, when we were studying Revelation, had this quote when focusing upon the slaves. It says, slavery shows laziness because they want to buy someone else to do their work. And so all of these things mentioned, they're not necessities. They're not things that they have to have. They're all luxurious items. They're to support their laziness, to support their different luxurious things. Now, is there anything wrong with having cinnamon? I mean, we have cinnamon today. Cinnamon's good. But I think it's a little different then. But is it wrong to have nice furniture, all these things? No, it was not. But it was their idols, exactly. And so they notice then verse 14. It says, the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you have found them, and you shall find them no more at all. And so this I have something about the fruit. Where is that at? Where did I put that? Oh, it's down here. Let's jump down to number 4, and then we'll come back. The word here, C4, the point C4, there are these two words. I like to point this out. When we get to a verse that word is only ever used there, there's probably a significance to it. And there's two words used here in this verse that are not used anywhere else in Scripture. And so fruits is one of them. This word, according to word study, is a fruit of late summer or autumn. So what is the fruit like in late summer or autumn? Yeah, squishy. It's fruit. It's its best. It's supposed to be its best time, right? It's the most flavorful. And so here they are. Uh-oh, door's open. Aaron, you got it? I don't think I got it shut when I came in earlier. But it points to the best time of the year when the fruit is juicy. And so this fruit was that they start to long for that. Notice verse 14. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you. Well, we'll go back up to point 1. Rome is pictured here as losing that luxury and longing for them. The word longed, I think the King James uses lusted. And Thayer defines that as a desire, a craving, a longing. It was an intense desire. They're missing their luxurious things, and they're going, I want that nice fruit. I want that nice luxurious thing that we had. And it's not just a desire, but it's a lusting. What is lusting? I think that's the best worst use of that word there, huh? Yeah, wanting something you can't have, and it to the point where it can be sinful, right? Because lusting is sinful. And so they are it's like a craving. It's like the starvation of needing that. It's just a luxurious thing, but yet they are craving it. Homer Haley again says this verse and the ones commented on clearly indicate that this harlot is not a religious symbol, but a representation of worldliness and lust. And I think that's important that this is focused upon of Rome and as a physical part of Rome. But the other word used there, dainty, I think the King James uses, the New King James uses rich and splendid. It's pointed to those delicate style of living. And so it could be like the furniture that made their lives comfortable and nice. They were missing these things. They were craving these things. And so Homer again says, what about the United States, which has a land of plenty and great abundance? It has taken much for granted, wasting and squandering its resources. It is approaching a time when it shall reach for the great abundance bestowed upon it by God and find it gone forever. I think that's a good quote. What does he mean by that? The United States, you think about it, we have a lot of luxurious things, don't we? Nothing wrong with having those things. But there are a lot of people in our world that is all they're striving for, right? Their focus is upon wealth. Their focus is upon making more. I think a big push for our society is to become as wealthy as we can be, right? It's not about doing good and helping others, but it's about self. It's about that pleasure, that luxury. The Bible, it's not in my notes, but the Bible many times has a lot of warnings for the rich. We are rich. I think every one of us here are rich compared to the rest of the world. And so there's a lot of responsibility that falls upon those that have a lot, to be able to help others, to be able to not trust in those riches, to not let those things become an idol, because it's easy to do. And that's what's going on here. These merchants, they're crying, these kings are crying because where do they trust? Those riches, that wealth, that luxury. And now it's gone, and they don't know what they're going to do. And so they're crying out, and I think it's very similar to things that could be happening in today in our society. Notice verse 15. 15 through 18, it says, the merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. Again, same thing as the kings. And saying, alas, alas, a great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who traveled by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the seas, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning. What is it like, this great city? Same picture that was given of the kings. They're standing back, they're seeing this destruction, and they're sorrowful. They're wailing because of it. Now, this is very similar to the kings, but I think there's a difference here, and it's interesting. The merchants, they called Rome a great city. The kings, if you go back to verse 10, they not only called Rome a great city, but they called it what? The mighty city. What does that mean by a mighty city? Can't be defeated. They put their trust in Rome because they thought they were great. The merchants looked at it as great because it was a lot of wealth for them. So did the kings. But the kings also looked to Rome because they thought of their fact that they thought that Rome could never fall. And they thought it was a strong city that could never fall. And so, all these things that are affected. You get down to verse 17 and 18. It says, every shipmaster who traveled by sea, sailors, as many as trade on the sea, stood out at a distance. Homer Haley says this, all nautical life, industry, and trade are affected by the fall of the great city. So I'm going to read Ezekiel 27:32. Ezekiel 27:32.
In the remnant for you they will take out the lamentation, and lament for you. What city is like Tyre, destroyed in the midst of the sea?
Okay, the picture there is of Tyre being brought into silence in the sea. The picture that's given here, you notice it says, every shipmaster, all of those, they stood at his distance. Everything is desolate. There's nothing, nothing being traded anymore. Ships probably aren't moving, right? Because they're not moving trade. So what is the sea like? It's silent. And so that silence is going to be a silence of of Rome also. We're going to see that in the last part of the chapter. Blackwood said this: a culture that worships commercial success will strike the spark that ultimately burns it to ashes. I like that quote. A culture that worships commercial success. What does that mean? Worships commercial success. Materialism. A nation, a people that worship success and the commercial aspect, that wealth, will strike the spark that ultimately burns it to ashes. It means that worshiping of that wealth, that worshiping of those things, will ultimately be their demise. Why is that? Well, somebody read Luke chapter 12, verse 16 through 21.
Here, 21.
Yep.
Then he spoke a parable to himself. The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.
What happened to that rich man when he trusted in his goods?
Got called up on.
Yeah. In one night, what happens? He lost it all. That's the point here. When we worship, if a person or a culture or a nation, whatever, worships that commercial success, what does that look like? What does it look like when I say worshiping commercial success? When we talk about it was material things. How does a society worship material things? Huh?
That's all they think about.
Yeah, that's all their focus is, right? I really feel like America is at that point. Because everything is about making us more rich every day. When that's all we're focused on, when something tragic happens to that wealth, what happens to us? We stand back and see the smoke and we're wailing, and the gnashing of teeth, right? It leads to eternal damnation, doesn't it? For sure, ultimately. But that same picture can be us if we trust in those same riches. And so Homer again said, trade and commerce of themselves are not wicked. They are good when used for the welfare of humanity. However, when used for selfish luxury and gratifying a fleshly lust, they become unrighteous, profane, and wicked. And that's right. Making money and saving and doing things like that, there's nothing wrong with that. We can do a lot of good when we have those funds to help others, to provide for our families and things like that. But when it becomes something that we use for that selfish luxury, the gratifying of lust and unrighteousness, is when it becomes our downfall. And so that's what was going on with those nations. That was going on with Rome. And I feel like it's going on in our society, for sure. So we got to be careful of that. And so verse 19, it says, they threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, the great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Somebody read Job chapter 2 and verse 12. Job 2 and verse 12.
And when they lifted up their eyes afar off, and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one of his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven.
Okay, so that was a picture of Job, right? He was in mourning. What did he do? He threw dust upon himself and threw it up in the air. It was a sign of mourning. That's the picture that's given here. They are throwing dust on their heads. They're crying out. They're weeping and wailing because they're lamenting. They don't know what to do now. They put all their trust in something that's now gone, and they don't know what to do with their life. And ultimately, what happens when someone puts so much trust and faith in something like material things, it unfortunately leads to suicide. It unfortunately leads to, depression, things like that. And ultimately, it's not good for that person at all, because their faith is now in something. It was in something that is physical, and it doesn't help them out really in the long run. And so, the picture here is it'll happen in 1 hour. Of course, that's showing the swiftness of God's judgment. And we already read Luke 12, but it can happen in a moment. And God's judgment came upon them in a moment. All right, Aaron, I've got the last page on the back table back there. Can you grab that for me? So we got more time. I didn't know if we'd get here or not. But let's try to finish out this chapter. But verse 20 through 24, somebody would like to read that.
Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more. And the sound of a millstone shall be not heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more. And the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth.
All right, so verse 20, it starts really another point. But it says, Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, O holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. So the angel is saying, rejoice. They're seeing this destruction happen, and so they're told to rejoice. Is it a prideful joyce or rejoicing? Is it a gloating because that they have won? No, it's a praise that God has taken his vengeance out on those that had murdered the saints. And I think it's interesting because it mentions the apostles here. It mentions the prophets. I don't think we've seen that. We've seen the prophets before. We haven't seen the apostles mentioned. But they were martyred, weren't they? They were killed because of their faith and what they did. And so this is a picture of all of those, the saints, the apostles, the prophets who had for years worked to do God's will that were murdered, are now rejoicing because God has taken vengeance on them. Somebody read Revelation 6, verse 9 and 10. This is a key verse. Revelation 6, verse 9 and 10.
When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar, and the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?
Revelation 6, 9, and 10 was the start of this. This was the picture of the saints who were murdered under the altar of God, saying, How long? The answer is Revelation 18 and verse 20. Because now, the angel can say to those saints that were crying out, How long? Rejoice, now it's happened. And so, the answer for their question is here. And they have reason to rejoice. Somebody read Psalm 58, 10 and 11. Psalm 58, verse 10 through 11.
The righteous shall rejoice when he seeth the vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked. So that a man shall say, Verily there is a reward for the righteous. Verily he is a God that judgeth in the earth.
All right, so there is that picture of the righteous saying God does reward, God does avenge us that have been righteous and have died because of that. And so God does promise to take vengeance, doesn't he? Somebody read 2 Thessalonians 1, verse 6 through 10. 2 Thessalonians 1, verse 6 through 10.
Since it is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who trouble you, and to give you who are troubled rest with us when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, in flaming fire taking vengeance on those who do not know God, and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. These shall be punished with everlasting destruction, and from the presence of the Lord, and from the glory of his power, when he comes in that day to be glorified in his saints, and to be admired among all those who believe, because our testimony among you was believed.
All right, so ultimately, God takes vengeance upon all that is wicked, and taking vengeance upon them. And so God does. The vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It's not for us, right? Romans chapter 12. But it is for God. And so you see the picture here. They're rejoicing, not gloating and saying, ha, 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 but they're rejoicing that God has avenged them, that God has taken care of those that were wicked and killed them and murdered them. And so ultimately, in the situation that the people that are reading this, they're asking that question. They're saying, when are you going to execute this judgment upon those that are doing this? You know, we talked about this through this chapter, but does God always, at that moment, deal with the problem? Sometimes it's going to be time, right? How long did they have to wait? It was a long time. Rome really didn't end until about 486 BC, is what's believed to be. And so, that's several years still later. And so, the Christians had to endure through that. People lost their lives. They still cried out, when is this going to happen? But ultimately, they can look down and see that vengeance come about upon those Caesars that did these things to them. And ultimately, in the end, they're going to see that vengeance God has on those and be able to rejoice and say, I lived a righteous life, and God protected my soul, of course, but he also took vengeance on those that were wicked. So that's the same thing for any nation throughout history. Any nation that goes against God, any nation that persecutes Christians. There's people in this country, in this world, that are living in this situation. India, China, things like that, where they're being murdered for following God. And they're probably saying the same thing. When? How long? And there will be a day that God will take vengeance out upon those that are doing this. And so this theme continues on throughout history until the end. And so we see that here. All right, we're out of time. We'll pick up and finish the rest of this chapter next week. But thank you guys for your time. Yeah.
It uses the 1 hour, but it doesn't represent a period of time, or was Babylon destroyed in an instant? It seemed like it would take some time.
The 1 hour is not literal. It's just the swiftness.